Now that we have all of the intrinsics, as well as all of the exotic catalysts, it is time to finally review Barrow Dyad in its complete form. Now, if there's one thing to be said about this exotic, is that it was not easy getting this thing and unlocking this thing. And I would argue and say it's one of the hardest exotics in the game to get, at least all of the unlocks found on this weapon. So a question that we're going to be answering at the end of this review, is this exotic even worth it? But more on that later. For now, let's start with the basics. Barrow Dyad is a Strand 720 round per minute SMG, putting it in the same category as the likes of Immortal, Ikelos, and other aggressive frame SMGs. Now, this is also a craftable SMG, meaning you could change up your barrel, your mag, your stock options, and your choice of an exotic catalyst, as well as intrinsic upgrades, which increases the stats on Barrow Dyad. Now, this weapon comes with the intrinsic exotic trait called Panic Response. This weapon generates blight as it deals damage. While not firing, blight depletes and the magazine is gradually refilled. Reload the weapon to then convert stored blight into blighted seekers. Now, I'm sure most of you already know how this works, but as you deal damage, you'll notice a meter in the left corner there starting to fill up. And you'll also even notice on Barrow Dyad itself, when aiming down sights, you have this circular meter, which is also filling up. Or if you're hip firing, there's even another meter as well. Now, the amount of blight that you generate is around 2% per damage instance. So essentially, you'll reach 100% blight after dealing damage 50 times. Blight then decays at a rate of 3.33% every 1.2 seconds after not firing for 1.3 seconds. And overall, it takes about 41 seconds to fully decay. Now again, this is at base, not taking into account our other intrinsics that help generate blight, which we'll be getting into here shortly. Now, when you reload, this will load blight rounds into your magazine, which lasts for 7 seconds. And the amount of blight rounds you get depends on how much you fill up your meter before reloading. Now, after reloading, you can see on your weapon's reticle that these circles will fill up, showing you how many blight shots that you have to a max of 6. Now, the balance here is whether you want to reload right away, or maybe you want to let your mag auto refill a bit more, which yes, will deplete some blight, but it'll let you get some more shots in, accumulating more of that meter. Now, I know a lot of people are going to say, Cross, couldn't you just take advantage of the full auto bug, turn that off, and you can essentially just sit there and shoot with the SMG almost indefinitely, which I guess you could. Yes, it does stop at 1 bullet, and you could just sit there and lay on the trigger, but guys, that rate of fire is so slow. This isn't Touch of Malice, and this thing doesn't put out nearly enough damage to limit yourself in this way. Now, one thing I like is when it does auto reload, it will fill up to 1 shot under your max mag count that you can always reload, and you don't need to shoot out a shot. A really nice feature there. Now, this takes us to our other intrinsic trait. This is where you have to choose between taking resolution or taking ambition. And this is dependent on the path that you have currently selected at the shaping slab. Now, when you get the 5th intrinsic upgrade, this will then allow you to permanently craft which intrinsic you want at the Enclave, which is really nice as it doesn't lock you into a particular path through the shaping slab, but instead through the weapon itself. Now, first up, we have Taken Resolution, which is the original intrinsic perk that you can get on Barrow Dyad, and it reads that hitting 3 different targets generates a large amount of blight. Blight seekers board through targets. Think of this sort of like One for All, where you need to hit 3 separate targets within a few seconds of each, but doing so grants you 50% of your blight meter, meaning you can completely fill it up by just proccing the perk twice by hitting 6 targets. Now, once you reload, this gives your blight rounds the ability to essentially ricochet and bounce between targets, which works pretty well for Aquire, but its single target damage isn't the greatest, only hitting for 5,788 damage per seeker here at Carl. Now, it's not a bad intrinsic, definitely more suited for AoE damage and ad clearing, but the other intrinsic choice is what really makes this weapon stand out, that being Taken Ambition. This trait reads that blight generated increases the longer this weapon remains on a target. Blighted seekers burrow into targets and explode. Now, for this trait, when you hit 12 shots on a single target, this will generate 20% of your blight meter. And it also doesn't need to be consecutively fired without stopping. You can actually pop shots here and there, as there's a little bit of time forgiveness between the shots being landed. Now, this though allows you to generate blight incredibly quick if you have a thick enough target. And with how the meter rounds, you only need to land 24 shots before reloading, and this will give you enough blight to have 6 seeker shots. Now, the main reason for using this is the damage. Again, with Taken Resolution, our blighted seekers only did 5,788 damage against Carl, but with Taken Ambition, these Taken seekers explode on impact, and they deal a total of 19,574 damage, that being 18,087 plus the 1,487 damage that you see here in front of you. And we've done damage testing previously on Barrow Dyad, and it works beautifully with things like Storm's Keep, Peacekeepers, Unraveling Rounds, considering it's a strand weapon, and we were cranking over 1 million damage. And I know a lot of people saw the damage test comparison between Barrow Dyad and Final Warning, and unfortunately some of the comments on that video were folks saying that Barrow Dyad sucked. It actually doesn't, and it out-damages a lot of other weapons, including things like Lucky Pants with hand cannons. It's just that final warning, especially with trick sleeves, that just puts out a tremendous amount of damage. With that being said though, taking ambition, in my opinion, is the preferred way, or at least my preferred way, to use this SMG, especially when it comes to in-game content where ads and everything else is just a lot thicker. Now let's talk about catalysts. First up, we have high impact reserves, where rounds at the end of the magazine deal more damage. And for Barrow Dyad specifically, this starts to proc on the 17th shot of her magazine. Our crit damage at base against Coral is 1,728, and then on our 17th shot, that jumps up by 12%, with our final shot jumping up by 25.6%. Now personally, I think this catalyst is by far the worst of them. On top of that, the secret rounds themselves don't get the damage buff, just your base shots. Now our second catalyst option is Hatchling. Precision final blows or rapidly defeating targets with this weapon spawns a threadling at the target's location. Essentially, when you get one precision kill, or if you rapidly defeat 3 targets within 3 seconds of each other, this will then spawn a threadling at the target's location upon death. Now a neat thing about Hatchling is that Hatchling damage does seem to progress your panic response meter, although not by much, but still a nice little inclusion there. On top of that, the secret rounds can also spawn in threadlings if they get kills, which is quite nice. I know this perk is a bit basic to most, but there is some solid options here considering the strand synergy that we have going on with our artifact mods this season. From Thread of Evolution, which increases our threadling damage, to Unraveling Orbs, Horde Shuttle, Vile Weave, and to Shreds. There's a lot going for this weapon simply for just being strand. And with Hatchling, you can lean into that even further. But this now brings us to One for All. This perk reads that hitting 3 separate targets increases damage for a moderate duration. Now this is a 35% increase in damage after hitting 3 separate enemies within 3 seconds of each other, and it lasts for 10 seconds. Now I'm sure you can already imagine the synergy this has with Taken Resolution, as they literally work almost identical with needing to hit 3 separate targets. Now this is a very easy perk to get going. It's also quite nice as it's not only boosting your normal weapon damage, but also those seeker shots as well. With Taken Resolution, they go from 5,788 damage against Coral to 7,814 damage with One for All procs. Then when using Taken Ambition, those seekers go from 19,574 damage to a whopping 26,425 damage. Now a question we wanted to answer was whether the seeker rounds themselves can proc One for All, especially when using Taken Resolution, since those seekers can bounce between various targets. The answer here is yes, but also no. The seekers definitely can proc One for All. As you can see in this clip here, I fire out multiple seekers and they each hit an enemy and then proc One for All. However, when using just a single seeker and having it bounce between targets, you can see here that it does not work. Right here in this clip, we fire out one seeker and it hits multiple enemies, but One for All doesn't proc. A bit unfortunate for sure, as that would have aided the synergy further. But if you're rocking things like One for All with Resolve, then these perks are likely to proc at the same time anyways, so you probably won't need to depend on the seekers themselves to proc One for All too often, but still, would have been a nice touch to have included that. Now finally, we have Target Lock. The perk reads that damage increases the longer this weapon remains on a target. This is definitely one of those perks that has given Bungie some problems, especially on the PvP side. Look no further than Immortal with Target Lock when it first rolled out, but this perk grants a ramping damage buff starting at 12.5% of the magazine capacity, and then will reach max strength at 5 stacks after firing 110.33% of the mag capacity. So essentially here, guys, you need something feeding ammo back into the weapon in order to get that complete boost. Now the damage increase starts at 16.73% and then will ramp up to 40% at max strength. So on Barrow Dyad here, a normal crit against Coral is 1,728 damage, and the highest we're able to get to when using Target Lock is 2,406 damage on our very final shot, so roughly 39%. Now the thing to keep in mind for Target Lock is that it falls off if you miss a shot. Hell, it falls off if you stop firing. It falls off when you have to reload. So what that means is that if you're buffing your base Barrow Dyad shots when firing, the moment you have to reload or proc panic response for those seeker rounds, you lose that buff. Now you can get a slight buff on the seekers after reloading, so Target Lock does work on them, but you're not going to get the full buff. Again, with Taken Ambition, our seekers do 19,574 damage. The highest we can get it was to 24,268 damage, close to a 24% increase for our 6th seeker. Which brings us to the question, which catalyst is actually better, specifically between One for All and Target Lock? Now we put them head to head in a damage test against Greg, and the damage results were somewhat close close. Surprisingly though, target lock did pull ahead. Against Greg, the best number we got for target lock was 1.4 million. Then with one for all, the best number we got was almost 1.3 million. Now the reason for this is that although target lock and the secret rounds don't take full advantage of the high target lock stacks, you're still buffing the base damage of Barrow Dyad, and you're able to sustain that easily on single targets. Whereas one for all, even though it has a very solid damage buff of 35% and it's great for the secret rounds, it only lasts for 10 seconds. But keep in mind, guys, how often are you going to sit there doing DPS to a single target with this SMG? Probably not often. Even with Peacekeepers, which it did put out some very impressive damage during our damage testing, for Barrow Dyad, I plan on just using it for things like GMs and clearing out a ton of ads. Court of Blades is a very popular activity this season, and I would definitely take one for all in there, as it's so easy to just keep that buff procced. If I did find myself having to deal with higher health targets and single targets, then sure, target lock would probably be the play. But I just don't see that happening that often. Now, in terms of kitting Barrow Dyad out, I would definitely go take an Ambition, just because the damage from those Seekers are too good. I know Resolution has more synergy with something like One for All, but the damage output of that path is just better. For your Barrow perks, you've got a lot of great options, guys. Hammer Forge for range, Small Bore for range and stability. You got Corkscrew for range, stability, and handling. Just choose what you want. For your magazine, though, you've got Flare Magwell, which gives you plus 15 reload and plus 5 stability. Alloy Mag is also really good, as it gives you faster reload when the mag is nearly empty. You've got Appendant Mag, which gives you plus 3, and it also doesn't hurt your reload. So again, dealer's choice on those. I would just stay away from things like Extended Mag, as yes, it does give you that plus 4 and a little bit of AE, but it kills that reload speed, which is a big penalty on the main gameplay loop that's present for this SMG. And as for the stocks, guys, whatever you want. Now for my PvP players, you definitely want everything you can that can boost your range. The max range you can get with Barrow Dyad is 22 meters. Now damage wise, it does 24 damage per crit and 14 damage per body. Time to kill wise, it pretty much stays in line across the board at 0.75 seconds, with max resilience guardians requiring 10 crits, with it dropping in levels of forgiveness as your resilience gets lower. Now the Seeker damage itself inside of PvP does 30 damage in total. It's 21 plus 9, and from a single optimal kill, which say takes like roughly 10 shots, you'll get 2 Seeker shots, which means you can follow up and land 2 Seeker shots and then 8 crits and still kill guardians at tier 10 resilience, which on paper is a 0.58 time to kill value. It's pretty nice, but I do want to bring up the point that the Seekers are kind of funky. Sometimes they just completely miss. And what's even worse is that in close range, it seems to suffer with that inconsistency even more so. And I think it's the way in which the Seekers launch out of the weapon. It's like an arch to it. And if an enemy is closing the gap on you, those Seekers will just straight up go past the targets. Could you use Barrow Dyad inside of PvP? Sure. I like it with target lock. You can kill guardians in almost 0.67 seconds with a little more forgiveness, add max resilience, add 8 crits to body. But until these Seekers become more consistent, I just can't recommend it, guys. Immortal is just better amongst a number of other SMGs that I just prefer over Barrow Dyad, which is unfortunate because this really should be a moment for this SMG to shine. This is one of those that I hope Bungie does come back to the drawing board and rework those Seekers to have more consistent tracking, especially on a target that's pushing you aggressively inside of PvP. So guys, that is our review for Barrow Dyad, our final review. Let me know in the comments below what you think. Fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching, and as always,
Slap that like button like your mama told you right.